one of the lids didn't snap tight. So I'm like, it's these kind of frustrating things. Okay, I understand it didn't snap tight. That's great. We can use it and make our own sauce. We'll use that one first. It's in the fridge right now. We know we can't store it in a shelf. These are just things you're going to have to learn. The quality of lids at the point. And then just before we went on break, Ransom was saying this demonization campaign of anything food storage. The demonization, the scare factor of don't use a pressure cooker, it's going to blow up, it's going to scar you for life, it's going to scar your kids, don't get it. Oh, that's how many accidents they've had. But yeah, those are the ones from the 1940s, I guess. And again, if there's some common sense around it where you're not going to put a 15-pound weight on it, and even if you take the weight off, it's just going to the steam to come out. I mean, where do they get these scare stories where a whole entire pressure cooker is going to overpressurize and blast off and send shrapnel through the walls and blast you with hot water and everything? I just don't get it. Even if the pressure cooker were to over pressurize and snap out, and it would just send hot water everywhere. It wouldn't send hot tomato sauce, hot bean curd everywhere. So what is it that the inavailability with anything to get your food processed? And again, I'll go back into the freezer bags for a second, because I was looking for freezer bags because I have a vacuum sealer. You can buy the vacuum sealers now. They're back in stock in a lot of places, but the bags are not there. So there's always one. You're going to have to be continuously head on a swivel looking for parts and pieces to get this whole. Once you grow it is one thing. There's many, many facets to this whole game here. You're going to have to grow your own food. Then you're going to have to process it for storing it. And then you're going to have to actually do something with it. Put it in a jar. Put it in a vacuum sealed bag. Oxygen absorbers? Are you kidding me? Out of stock, out of stock, out of stock everywhere. Good luck ordering those even on Amazon, because everybody's in the same thing. Before, there was a very specialty niche of maybe 1% of the population, possibly 2%, would be into canning their own food, drying their own foods, storing their foods, dehydrating, etc. Now the pendulum's probably at like 7%, 8%. It has so overwhelmed the manufacturers that they're unable to even facilitate a percentage of what the demand is now. And you got to wonder, is the same Fortune 500 companies are the ones that are manufacturing all of these implements to allow you to store food. So you have to wonder, if they're in on the game too with this global governance, of course they're going to pull back anything that's going to allow you to be self-sufficient, storing your food outside the system. I don't know. I'm going to leave it there because I could keep rambling for another half hour or so on this whole conundrum of everything that you need to get yourself taken care of, including buying seeds online. They're getting more and more difficult. The amount of seeds that you used to have, hundreds of kinds of seeds, hundreds of varieties of seeds, is now shrunk into like 50. You're getting squeezed. Like, I don't know how many of us could just survive on watermelons all the time. But if you look, there's a huge amount of watermelon seeds. But then you get into some of the broccolis and the squashes and these types of different corns, heirloom corns. They're just not there anymore. They're just gone. So, amaranths and the grains and the ancient grains and the spelt and these kind of things, super specialty crops that are going to keep you alive for a long time, they're just harder and harder to come by. And you're going to have to grow it to get your own seed to then bring it back in and then save seed and keep 50% of your crop and save 50% for seed.
Yeah.
It's like a Rubik's Cube trying to figure it out without going insane and knowing that there's hope and you can still prosper and thrive and survive during these changes. But, if you've already started and you're listening to this broadcast for the first time and go, oh, I need to go buy ball jars tomorrow after listening to these guys, I do wish you the best of luck in your preparations, because at the level we're operating, trying to get prepared now, we're finding it real difficult to find all these implements. I don't know about you, Ransom, out there, if you're seeing the same, but it seems a little difficile right now.
It is kind of hard to get stuff here. It's always been that way here, so we feel it more when there's a lack of stuff, because we already are on a 2-day wait from anywhere. I kind of wanted to get your opinion on something that's kind of similar to what we were talking about. It's not really, I don't think it was the, fear of people hurting themselves with the pressure cookers. They feared everybody with some joggers in Boston, if you know what I'm talking about, a while back. That's why all of a sudden it became unavailable. But that was preemptive, like to now. That's kind of what I was saying. And your point to, only certain percentages of people were ever into prepping and storing and doing these kinds of things. That's kind of what I was talking about. Whenever it becomes time where normal people with reason start realizing that they're going to have to do this, all the supplies will be gone for starting to do that. So people are going to have to become very inventive on how to store things and grow things. And you're right about the seed thing. I have a bunch of amaranth and some other stuff growing, and that's what I was talking about. It seems like I have very few ears of corn developing and things like that. I'm just going to have enough to store seeds and not really eat it. But I wanted to ask you about this. Whether you believe it or not, anyway, they're saying that 20% of Americans, they have ended friendships or relationships with people over facts about, the current pandemic. I'll just go ahead and say that. And then 29% of them say they've already lost somebody to COVID death. Now, I don't know how many people took this poll. It was probably only like 100 or something. But the idea that 29% of people actually know somebody kind of brings me to some other headlines that are on. I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about it or not, but I'm sure you've been seeing or hearing a little bit about some of the politicians that were making early decisions at the beginning of this whole thing, where they were shoving some people in places where older, more susceptible people lived, that they probably shouldn't have did that just out of common sense. It seemed like common sense to anybody. But anyway, a lot of people died. And what do you think about how they're kind of shrugging it off, where most of these key individuals that had something to do with this all of a sudden develop these scandals that they'll have to go for? Like Como there, he's got all these scandals all of a sudden that just, when you're weighing out things, it doesn't seem to weigh out to the other thing, what they're talking about. But these guys get to slip off into oblivion with waves of culling. It's kind of what I'm calling it, because, one person will make a decision and then a lot of people have to deal with that. And then they say, oh, well, it was a whole group and it was the situation. But then they keep doing these things. They keep doing it and doing it again. And they just, will get rid of them from something else. And then you got the same guy with his family members in the media kind of steering these stories. And this is where we get to not knowing what's true and what's not true, because you have so many of these fake percentages, polls, and things like this. And that people like Como will never be held responsible for anything they do. They may disappear into obscurity with some kind of scandal, but it kind of makes you realize that they're all scrambling at the end of the Titanic here to, get their position in the new organization of things, if that makes sense, because it's kind of obvious that our government has gone through a massive reorganization. And the part of the delusion, like these things, like they're going to put them away and you're going to think it's about that scandal and not the real scandal that he did. They're doing this on a massive scale with people that just don't realize that hunger's coming, because so many people are dependent on a little plastic card. It was harder to get away with it. Kind of what my point was earlier. It's harder to get away with it when you see the poverty in the streets and you see the shelves empty. But if you can convince people that, their cards are malfunctioning or there's just a supply chain problem, but the stuff's coming, don't worry about it. You have, given this delusion out there that there are no soup kitchens and there is no problem. But really, isn't that what EBT and this universal basic income idea of stay home, don't work, and we'll give you just enough to go to these places to get your food, and then maybe we can't give you as much each month in the food department because of this, that, or the other thing. And that plays right into what you were talking about. And I'm going to go ahead and say they're already, in a way, giving us rations through just saying things are out. Now, somebody told me at the dollar store that they're not even going to be covering ordering Starbucks anymore. It's not going to be a product that they're going to be carrying in there. And the reason given is because the supplier can't get it to them, and the supplier says, well, Starbucks not making it, and Starbucks says, well, we got a problem with milk and this, that, and the other thing. And these are the same corporations trying to divide and separate people into little groups with these social justice warrior narratives that go along. And these are the same people now that people think have the power over their food. So, like, in Demolition Man, there was only the Taco Bell in the future. And even in our future, which happens to be the same year as that science fiction movie, our year is at the same time. And there really is a weird thing going on with the fast food places where they've changed all their menus to give you the most basic things. So that right there is what the future of American, at least, delusional, choice. And really what you're getting is a ration. And think about what you're getting from these places, using Taco Bell as an example. You get some old dehydrated lettuce, some tomatoes that are old and dehydrated, and then you get some low nutrition meat and whatever the gross stuff was that didn't, because I used to be a butcher, so they carve a lot of stuff off the animal that's not going to go in the display case, and all of that stuff gets ground up into ground meat, and that's what you buy as ground beef. So it's like head meat, and all of the stuff that you would generally think you wouldn't eat is what hamburger meat is. And we all know that even in the home, not just the fast food place, but even in the home, hamburger meat is like the main food source. And you were talking about what happens when they start cutting back on animals. Well, you'll start seeing it in the store. And you're right. What do human beings do without animal fats? They slowly get malnourished. I mean, you need the equal amount of animal fats that you do in alkaloids in fresh greens. So if you're not able to grow greens and you can't get meat, and you're going to the store getting these high calorie, low nutrition meals, that is exactly what you were talking about getting these little rations. And then what happens, because we've already seen it last year, the stores were saying, please only take 1 carton of egg or 1 gallon of milk. And that's when we were supposedly filled to the brim in the supply chain, because that was just at the beginning. So now we've had a whole year of all these people not working, not producing, not farming. And then you have the people that continue to eat and continue to take in resources, even though no new ones are being provided. And that sounds like, even if there wasn't something else going on, that's obviously not a sustainable lifestyle for a country to live in, or much less the world.
I'm going to say that that's a get out of jail free card. What you described with the scandal Como. We saw this, what's prophetic as well is just prior to the outbreak in early 2020, they had the most CEOs, CFOs, and COOs, those C-level executives, all retire. The most that had ever retired in a single year, all retired in 2019. Wasn't it magic that they knew to get out right then? Or were they told to get out? You've done your part. You've moved the ball forward with all the corporatocracy, and thanks for your service, and this is your get out of jail parachute. Have fun, get out. So the larger they are, it appears, the bigger the scandals they're embroiled. So everybody's going to be rooting for them to be removed from power, rooting for them to be taken out, removed from the public eye, removed from the public scene. And it just fits in perfectly, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, Coleman, he disappeared. Good, he's out of there. Good. I hope we never see that guy again. He's on a beach somewhere going, hey, you all got played. Thanks, man. I just did my part. And we see this again and again with high-level people who have facilitated the agenda, the narrative, to move the globalist playbook and football match another yard down the field, and they're being rewarded. So when you see scandals, think of that as an exit for the persons who have finally completed their mission to states, countries, like Trudeau. Watch what's going to happen with Justin Trudeau as well. They've already had the inklings, the Achilles heels are being opened up at the moment, and watch, it won't be too long before he's removed as well, because he's done his part already. And the next player comes in to take over. It's like on the side of the field. All right. Sub in, number 7 out.
Yeah.
Trudeau out. Durvey come in, ivermectin in,
Yeah.
whoever it is, and the next person that's coming in. And you get the circle jerk again and again and again. So I'm wondering who is at the last point where they, like you say, on the Titanic, they're all at the lifeboats already down in the water, floating away from the sinking ship. So, who are the last politicians to be left holding the bag, or how quickly do they get caught out where they can't get into the bunkers? Because here, that couple shows ago, I kept saying that one phrase, I'm taking up a new hobby. That is the key words for politicians to exit pronto to get to your safe location. If you hear anybody in the news media start talking about taking up a new hobby, anybody at really high levels talking about taking up new hobbies, that means they're bugging out right then. That is the exact key phrase for politicians and leaders and high level people to leave immediately to your safe area. And I'm not kidding about that either. That is the exact phraseology. I am taking up a new hobby. Something with taking up a new hobby. When you hear that phrase, they are bugging out and everybody's running to the hills in power. That's the phrase you're looking for, truly. And I was trying to throw them off and trying to see if any of the politicians would bite on my phrase and be like, dude, those guys are talking about it's time to leave. Just to see what they would do.
Right.
That's me, though. I'm kind of one of those pranksters.
So yeah, along those same lines, I'm kind of waiting on people like Bill Gates and George Soros and all of them to all of a sudden retire, which leaves the public with no one to point the finger at anymore, right? There's no bad guys. They all retired or they had a little scandal and they left, like you said. But it's not just them. You were talking about all the CEOs. I sent you a couple articles here that are about a record number of wealthy people are renouncing their American citizenship. They think something's up. They're going to places in the southern hemisphere. Here's another article. It's not just the rich starting a new life elsewhere, driving many to seek out citizenship outside the U.S. So you even see, I'm not going to say the rats fleeing the ship, but you're right. Who's the last guy? Do we wait? Who's the conductor that you finally see get in the lifeboat before we know that they are pulling the plug? The way I look at it, maybe I'm crazy, but when I see places like Fort Bliss taking in thousands and thousands of people, putting them on buses, flooding them into the United States, I see that that's the exact same thing or agenda that's going on in Europe, which got me wondering, why are they all moving to the central band of the earth? Because basically that's what we're seeing. In your research and a lot of work, you see all of these companies headed to Central America, headed to Northern Africa, and places like that, because that seems to be where the future lies in the not too distant future. Because I don't see the elite or heads of companies letting their, their, what do you call it, their legacies go by, their children, their fortunes, without, having a part of it. So I don't see them moving all down there unless they feel like their family or their interests are going to be covered. And, that has to make you wonder, what are you going to be left with if you're living here in the Northern Hemisphere with the majority of the third world and the leftovers of the old world up here, kind of just crumbling at the edges while our government sell us out, steal all of the inherited wealth, biggest transformation of wealth in history. All of these things are like terms that have happened in the past couple of years that keep driving our nation to nothing, because people to realize that really what we used to have here in the United States as far as a major manufacturing and the food basket of the world, the bread belt and all of this stuff that we used to be, we are no longer those things. So in order for any semblance of community or freedom or any of that to survive, it's time to just disassociate yourself with the system. You're going to have to be like those people in Pakistan or India, except for make the other choice. Leave the phone behind, grow your own food, work with like-minded people, and this puts you out of the realms of powers of affecting you until they actually come door to door and try to mess with you. And hopefully by then, you've made enough connections to push back on it.
Well, do you think I could maybe make a politically incorrect statement here? Maybe two even.
Oh.
If you would allow me. Uh-oh. Not that crazy, don't worry. I won't get you banned again. moving people from one part of the world to the other so there's no resistance when the food growing areas are vacant seems to be a trend. And I'd started following this whole migration thing from Africa because my eyes were on Africa well before the migration started. Because knowing that the West African monsoon would shift, and as it shifted, it would bring more rainfall in through the Sahel. And then knowing what Muammar Gaddafi did with his well drilling program, and not oil wells, water, inland seas created out of desert by pumping the Nubian aquifer. And it was pretty close to the surface in so many places, continually refilling, because all it was filtered water from the Mediterranean coming through the rock substrate. And learning how many thousands of square kilometers of water aquifers there were beneath the Nubian aquifer, and I should say tens of thousands of kilometers, square kilometer, how many of those and how all-encompassing it was. Pretty much Northern Africa is just one giant ocean filter that dumps out a bunch of fresh water 100 miles from the coast inland, underground. Now you put those two together, where you get the increasing above ground rainfall, and then you have access to all the beneath ground water resources. That is going to be a new growing area on the planet. And me focusing on my grand solar minimum crop losses, I was like, wait a second. If Northern Europe starts to reduce production, and Russia starts to reduce production, and Canada does too, and Northern China, United States, Australia, if they all start to reduce production, that's a gargantuan amount of food that's not going to be grown on the planet for everybody to consume. So I was looking for areas thinking, wow, if that 13 million square kilometers of the Middle East and North Africa were converted to it would be larger than all of North America combined as a food grow area. And secondly, they could get a double rotation crop because of the abundant sunlight, and the temperatures are quite different. They don't get winter as we understand it. It doesn't snow except in the mountains in Northern Africa. Two full-on chock-a-block, blockbuster, gangbuster grow seasons that probably have some of the highest ever seen on the planet with our modern agriculture. But there would be a resistance force of some tens of millions of men down there, Western powers, and knowing the history of Western powers with slavery, etc., they would say, no way. You're not coming down here to colonize us again for our food growing area. Get out of here, not a chance. Don't even put a foot in. Don't think about it. Night, night. But you know what? Suddenly that whole exit strategy to get all of the, 10 million men have left that area now and gone to other places in greener pastures? Well, they're never, so that removed a 10 million man standing army out of that area. Now anybody can pretty much go down and colonialize it again and take it over and, put an army and have an occupation force down there, because it's mainly women and children. Except some of these rough nations that are still having the civil conflicts down there. But again, we all know those are all bought and paid for illusionary conflicts that have nothing to do with reality except weapons provided kind of things to keep resources, I guess, off the shelf. Keep them in the back burner. Because there's got to be something really juicy down there in the equatorial bands of Africa, because it's been in such a civil distress conflict zone for a century and a half. So there must be something worthy of all Western powers keeping that area in conflict for such an enormous amount of time. And then you just said it, swing down to Central America, swing down to southern Mexico, right there, Colombia, right at the edge of all the growing, right at the edge of the Amazon rainforest. So imagine all the Amazon rainforest, northern South America, all the way through Central America and parts of southern Mexico. We see the same repeating pattern. Massive immigration to get everybody out, the men. Massive possibility to increase agriculture, closer to some nations like ours, for example, but Europe's closer to the northern African areas. Same things. It's just a copy, paste, rinse, and repeat, because how much conflict has there been from Columbus. Ever since I've been a kid, it's always been everything's in conflict in Central America. Everything's in conflict in northern parts of South America. Revolution. There's never been stable moments. Rarely a stable moment across there. Now, southern Mexico, you got to wonder how many of these warlords are actually, special agents or special operations people going down there to stir up the camp. Same thing. Exit the people, keep the conflict going. Incredible grow zone. It will be the world's new breadbasket if occupied. I can't believe it's happening in 2 places, right? 2 out of the 3 major areas on the planet this is happening. Because the other area is, where do we see? Oh, Myanmar, which I used to do business in Myanmar. I can speak and attest to this perfectly. I used to buy coffee from there. That was one of my jobs when I was working in Asia. What do we see? It's one of the only areas left on the planet that could expand their agricultural area by 50%. It used to produce more rice than China did in the 1960s. They're only using half or even less than half of their full arable land to produce crops. They're using less than half of it. And suddenly, what has happened with the coup and all the instability? And what do we see across going on in Thailand right now? Same thing. Like, these are made enormous amount of food, destabilized once again. And it's like a copy, paste, rinse and repeat. I'm just waiting for the gates to open and say, hey, anybody from Thailand, come on out. Hey, anybody from Myanmar, hey, you're welcome over here. Come on out. All men, come on over here. Come on over here. Come on over here. I'm waiting for the last true area on the planet. There's only a few you could expand production. And when we see expansion of production possibility, we see immigration exits, we see warm grow zones near the equator, and we see instability. And I can't believe that they're all matching up, Ransom. It's a little too coincidental for me. But maybe I'm just a guy putting too many ideas together. I don't know.
Well, maybe so, but I was kind of wondering if any of this, perhaps, would have anything to do with these ancient land rights that a specific culture claimed. And, when you look through biblical history and other things like that, you see that, Abraham came from Ur in Samaria, and then there was this whole thing about promised land and who owned the land and whatnot. There was a massive migration of people to replace another people in a specific area. Now, you can go on and on, like we're talking about Central America. The Aztec came and replaced the Mayan. The Mayan came and replaced whoever was there before, but they seem to be on specific time frames.
Oh, man.
Yeah, these cycles keep going. So it makes you wonder if maybe some of these ancient gods we're talking about that claimed ownership of the lands is what it's all about. And you were talking about all of the people that moved. What about all the people that die every year with these conflicts? When we went into Iraq, we know that 1.9 million civilians died during that conflict. Then you count all of the displaced people that ran, and places like Oman and Yemen and these other places that are having their own, I'm going to say, ethnic cleansing type things going on. And then you go over into Central America and you got these little wars of cartels killing people, killing economies, trying to control the food. There's wars over avocados, corn, military involvement from governments on who's going to grow the corn and whether or not they can move away or not. I mean, things like these have been happening, and it kind of makes you wonder why some of these stories are so similar to those Sumerian tales about battles over land that was promised to specific peoples because those people worked for a specific god or not. And then we're about to come into a time where it seems like whatever happened with those conflicts has been kind of ironed out with them. So we're going to merge all of the religions together, all of the governments together, until we have a uniformed ant-like colony. So, when we hear these ancient stories about the ant people, it's not all that far-fetched when you realize the direction of our own evolution. And there's been lots of people talk about how we're kind of devolving. And if you put some of these ideas into play, it's almost like, let's go really far-fetched there. What if you needed a whole planet to become workers, but you needed those workers to be a specific way? How many generations would you have to work on the local biozone before you got a good hybrid of the two that you can manipulate. And then once you finally got it, wouldn't that be something like grays? Like, I mean, think about the evolution of man. When you look through the bones, you have these big, beefy, thick bone, thick muscled men. And then you fast forward down to now and you got these little weak bone osteoporosis, fem men. And you kind of look at that and we're developing big heads, big eyes. We sit inside, we look at screens. I mean, it's almost like we're a batch of grays that hasn't finished, forming yet. We need a couple more generations of, I'm going to say, genetic manipulation before we get the right kind of population on the earth. And I think it's going to look something like when we look in the fossil record and you see all of these different hominids on the planet, human beings of different kinds, and then all of a sudden there's just one kind. And I think that's what we're doing right now. So are we going to be the kind that disappears or the kind that stays here? I don't know. But it seems like there is a place for us, even in the elites' plans. And we've kind of touched on that about how it seems like they want to leave a little percentage of the population that's self-sufficient out there. Just enough to keep things going until they can take control of it again.
Well, I think the control has never been left, and I think that it comes through these cycles of where the human reach its full potential. And knowing that that's a cyclical clock pattern based on the electromagnetic effects from the sun, and during these cycles of going above and below the ecliptic, and as our solar system revolves around the spiral arm of our galaxy, intertwining with that and inflows into our sun, the step up or the step down in the current inflow or the brightness or luminosity or sunspot activity, however you want to term an electrical inflow up or down, influences directly the human, how they perceive reality, how they can be manipulated in the reality, and what they can see through, and the amount of BS in reality is an ever morphing and an ever shifting kind of goalpost, if you will. Now, if you knew the cycles in advance, you would know where the shift was, what the height and potential humans would become, how quickly that would happen, and then, again, the next reset comes in. Because if you look at the grand minimums, and I love history, and I wish I could delve into the history of these grand solar minimums. Now, there's one, let's say there's a lighter version of these grand solar minimums where the temperature 1 degree Celsius, approximately globally, maybe 0.75, would have an effect on society, definitely, because the growth seasons would be shrunken and the jet streams would still go out of their flows. But it wouldn't have the catastrophic effects as these more heavy, powerful 400-year cycles, where the global temperature will drop 2 degrees Celsius, maybe 2.5 degrees Celsius, which is a fair about 4 or 5 degrees Fahrenheit, which would really send everything into a tailspin. But then cycles of these, 5 of these cycles is where we're going, grand solar minimum now, once in a 2,000-year event. So take a look at the ebbs and flows of the civilization, not in terms of the population of numbers and then the collapse, but the population in cognitive ability, the rights given to them, the rights demanded by the civilization, the way it was overseen, and then during that collapse, what the reset set and control mechanism and measures in for the successive society. Because you can't tell me that Magna Carta just popped out during this last, go back 3 grand solar minimums, and Magna Carta just suddenly appears out of the woodwork. That was the very first of these transitions into where we see now. So if these elitists had tens of thousands, if not hundreds, if not millions of years of cycles mapped out, you go right back to these pillaging societies, and I'll leave it at that, from the Dutch to the Spanish, English. They pillaged the 600 years with their navies, not steal from other cultures. And you mentioned the Mayans, and the Olmecs predated that, and nobody knew where they come from. Even today, nobody knows really. There's a lot of guesses. There's the Toltecs in there somewhere around the Aztecs, but the Olmecs and the Mayans. And so what was taken from those societies? You know, and if you knew the civilization cycle and reset, and if you knew where the pole shifts would come and what the frequency was with the actual pole shifting, magnetic pole shifts, you would know some areas would be subsided and some areas would. Like the Navy has mapped the entire ocean bottom. So if you knew, and you had these cycles, 600 years of archaeological record from civilizations across the planet, mountains, river valleys, cave systems, whatever, and you assembled all this information back in a central repository like the Vatican, for example. They know these cycles millions of years back into the future or into the past. I think if you knew the cycles, you would know where the calamities was, and I'm sure they had ancient maps as well. We have today. Piri Reis is a good example of that. They had mapping technology pre-1500 as good as we have today. Longitude and latitude, which means they understood time and a central point marker, so you could get different references across the planet. You need a stationary clock to do such a thing. They understood mapping. Okay, that takes technology to such a high level pre-500 years ago that, you know, everything we ever learned is completely off and wrong. But then take that back, and if you understood where these societies were and how the earth had shifted and where some land had sunk, you could definitely find ancient cities that have been buried by mud. Today's excavating technology, drilling technology, you could easily get into whatever was covered. Imagine if you found a museum that was covered. Like, imagine if New York was buried under 800 feet of silt and mud in a few seconds, and somebody saw these maps of New York City and found the street maps and go, hey, there's a Metropolitan Museum of Art. Hey, there's a library here, whatever. And they were able to get into it some 400,000 years after the fact. What would they find? What kind of detailed maps would they have? And see, this is where it goes off to, then take it back a 500,000 years. All right, so this knowledge cycles is precise, and it has been shared amongst all ancient societies for such a long period of time. And the ones we're talking about right now are the very newcomers to it. I keep coming back to this thought about 118,000 years ago. What happened during that 10,000 year warm period of interglacial between two massive glaciation cycles? We don't know anything about that, and that's just merely 100,000 years ago. So the elite understand these cycles. They mapped it out. They understand the magnetic pole shifts. They understand the earth changes that, you know, this. So they would for sure know when the next cycle was occurring and how the humans would react to it and how much power we as a human species would have during the transition based on the electrification changes in the sun. And here's where we sit today. Why is the Great Reset here? They talk about the ancients that have always been in control of lands, societies, etc. Yeah, because we are on the planet farm Earth here. And imagine if this technology and this information was not even from this planet. That is an off-world civilization controlling this planet as a farm. That would have tens of millions of years of information about this planet's size. You know, there's a lot of that we're not being taught, allowed to know about the true nature history of our planet, how we resonate, how much power we take, what we can bend reality, human thought by all of us resonating together. Because one thing I've noticed in especially this last year, whatever is happening is the elite are incredibly terrified of we, the human species, the beings, coming together in any way, shape, or form. They're terrified of two of us getting together now. So what is it with our power as a human beings, resonation, manifestation capability, that the elite are so afraid that they're trying to keep grandchildren away from grandparents, people away from people, family members away from each other? Perhaps there's some maternal paternal bond in there that allows family units to manifest faster in this resonance we're in right now. That's why they want to keep everybody apart. But whatever it is, the elite are incredibly terrified of us coming together in any numbers at all. So, when protests going down weekend after weekend, the police forces come out even bigger with the army to try to stop it, because whatever's happening, we've reached this rollover point at the moment where human potential is risk of ancient cycles smacking into control mechanism. And I kind of leave it there because I go off on a woo-woo tangent sometimes, Ransom.
No, that's all right. I was thinking that it didn't really sound that woo-woo, and that's kind of the idea that I was trying to talk about with these, cycles of Central America and Northern Africa. They have ancient prophecies. They have ancient ownership. And if you think about what the only thing that ancient people were really allowed to keep through time, and it seems like it was time itself. The I guess the plan. They were allowed to know when things were going to happen. Like all of these ancient societies, one thing they were allowed to have through all of this time is ancient time. Now, it's so much time that it doesn't seem like humans were the ones keeping track of it. But if you were the one that had a plan, you would allow empires to rise and fall, but only to a certain point in their evolution that you wanted. So that may be why, we point out Central America and Northern Africa, the Middle East, these are all places that are having big turmoil and that they have for a long time. But they're also the places where we find ancient high technology. They're also the places we find megalithic spots. We're also the places where it seems like the only information the elites were even allowed to have were how to build things to navigate time and to know when empires should fall and when they should rise. It seems like that's an obvious thing that's been going on. They were allowed to keep that info, but I think to your point about, why are they scared of us getting together? You can tell from like the Renaissance and other times that when people are allowed to exchange information, whether it's generationally or between different peoples, free people, everything increases better. So that's what they're scared of. They need to hold back society and only allow them to have revelations at a prescribed rate, a planned rate to their plan. And it seems like that's why all of these places that have these ancient buildings are always infested with war zones, so that there's never really any, anthropological studies or real, look into the past. You can't just go to these places and start digging around. The government won't let you. Plus, there's other dangers that, you just can't do it. And then think about this. The only other place on the earth that had these ancient cities and stuff like that was Southern Europe and the upper Mediterranean, which is now being flooded with migrants, and old churches are being burned. So it seems like all of these elites, they've been allowed to have the time and the plan, just not what the plan is. And we're coming into that, obviously. And that's why we're about to rearrange borders and all of that. I look forward to a World War III in my lifetime, but I don't think it'll be about, so much culling as it is about redesigning the boundaries, just like they did in World War I and World War II. It seems like the main point of those wars were to design new boundaries, new ethnic lines, and, like you said, it's a great reset. And you mentioned all those empires, the British, the Spanish, etc. These are all empires that seem to know exactly where and when to go to get specific information. All the way up until 2003, it seemed like the empires of the earth were going around the earth systematically finding old information that it didn't seem like they were allowed to find until the right time, or they were told to go look at a specific time. What do you think about that? That kind of, we point out these connections, but what about that connection of all of the ancient places are all of the same places that have the best grow zones at specific times in the Earth's cycle, but also those are the no-go places. And it makes you wonder really about Antarctica and the Perry-Reese map and all of these things, these mysteries that surround it, why no one can go there. It seems like we're about to find out in a big way, and just not the way that we all wanted.
And sometimes I think about these wars, especially World War I, more of a destruction fest to remove tech from the remaining old world. In World War II, again, the same. I mean, it was senseless destruction during that time. Battles were already won, forces were in place, occupations, but they went and just carpet bombed everything in cities, specifically the old cathedrals. What might be a resonating dome or something that would conduct or receive vibration frequency. So for me, I look at the way that, yes, I totally agree with the redesigning and the reimplementation of borders, to set up for a new way of life, a new society. Because, I'm a fan of maps and I like looking at older maps. So take a look at 1850s, how the distribution of peoples was, the region or country that it was in. It was not about specific, okay, it ends at this river. It was a full region of people. And we look back in the, those 1820s, 1850s maps. I mean, the amount of countries on the planet, there were way less than 100 of them, way less than 100. Now we got 207 plus countries back at that point. It's where we understand countries and regions until after those, explorers went around and started dividing everything and falsifying the names of it and giving it the fake name. Before it was the region, the Zulu region, now they call it South Africa. Oh, then they split off Mozambique, and they cut off Zimbabwe over there. Oh, Malawi. Oh, that was the Shan people. Okay. Those regions were there, that was a massive region in the south, the Zulu region. That was not Zimbabwe, Rhodesia. It was something else. And the way you looked at the maps in the 1830s, 1850s, the world divided up, and then they keep continually slicing into smaller pieces. That's all one aspect. Social, okay. But at the same time, think about if there was tech left over from a previous civilization that everybody would start to see and understand. The further we came along in these timelines from, let's say, early 1800s, when there was a lot of buildings and, maybe wireless tech still functional or partially broken, a reset, a cataclysm through the Earth cycle here. Still, there was a lot of buildings that made, the great grandeur. They talk about all these cathedrals and we can't replicate, and there's an enormous amount of out of sync things happening. What if that was the tech that was left over, and once the new reset came in to try to push humanity into everything needs to be monitored, everything needs to be metered, there can be no free power, free electricity means free will on the planet. If there were this tech laying around from a previous civilization, it would have to be destroyed. But the amount of it would be just as much as if we have power lines across every city and power stations in every city and, there's transformers on all the lines and everything. How would you destroy that across all the nations of the earth today? Let's say we go down to 500 million people because of Earth's cataclysm, and all this infrastructure was left over for 8 billion people. You restart the society, you got 500 million people. Okay, now you need to explain to them why there's all this ancient from our time when they're whittling sticks together to try to start a fire, and they're wondering where those transformers are on the telephone poles. Well, it doesn't take too many generations to go, hey, maybe we can reverse engineer that. Well, suddenly another war comes in and everything gets destroyed on purpose again and again. Now it's all rebuilt, scraped to the ground. And a quick way to disappear a bunch of technology as well during these war events. Just saying.
No, it makes total sense, and that makes sense why you were talking about the carpet bombing of these cathedrals and the continual destruction of churches around the world. Also, all the ancient Sumerian sites that are in Islam countries are being destroyed. And I think the reason for that is because incorporated in the Masonic masonry of the building is esoteric knowledge about resonance, about bloodlines, about building, about all these ancient technologies are built right in to some of these old churches as a way to hide it from the public. But now we have a more savvy public, and maybe they just don't want people studying these things with the fad of, like movements like the ancient astronauts movement and other things where people are actually putting a microscope to some of these ancient things and coming up with answers that were right in front of our face. Maybe that's the reason that they're going around destroying the old and replacing it with a whole new grid of fancy, shiny 5G towers.
And brick? No, I shouldn't say brick. I should say steel and glass. It looks so sleek, but it only lasts 20 years. Like the remnants of previous civilizations are here for thousands. Our remnant will be a 20-year shelf life and glass will crumble and break, and the metal will be squashed like the things that are coming in with the hailstones. Maybe you saw in Germany, the 2-pound hailstones came down over so how many square miles and just smashed everything to oblivion. And smithereens is an understatement. 2-pound hailstones in our modern infrastructure could going through the roofs of buildings, going through the roofs of cars, got every single window. Nothing was left after the hailstorm. Billions of dollars of damage. 2-pound hailstones.
Thank you.